the oil and gas public in general, and trying to attract them to come to South Africa to look for oil and gas here. Secondly, once they're here and they've contracted with the state, we regulate their activity in exploration and production. And we're also the custodian of the National Petroleum Exploration Production Database. Of course, any kind of activity produces huge amounts of information, and it has to be archived and looked after and kept up to date so that it can be used for further exploration in the future and to guide us in trying to promote exploration. So that was Petroleum Agency SA in a nutshell, very quickly. So now what I'm going to do is go to our offshore and look at the oil and gas licenses for exploration that are active there, and just touch on some of those where things are about to happen in the pretty near future or are already happening. So here you can see a map that shows South Africa. And if you look at the offshore, you'll see underlying all those colored blocks and squares is a light blue area that extends out to the 200 nautical mile or 370 kilometer mark off our shores. And that is South Africa's exclusive economic zone. So on this map, if you concentrate on the offshore, there are 5 different color schemes, the sort of light blue or the very light blue, and that's area that is areas that aren't under any kind of license at the moment. In other words, open acreage. Then everything that's in a kind of shade of yellow or ochre color, those are areas that are either under application or being converted from one type of license to another. And the very lightest green, and there's only one of those on the map at the moment, and that's right up on the west coast in the north there on the Namibian border. You can see it's labeled Tasako. That indicates a technical cooperation permit, which is a desktop study. So people only, they get the data, they don't actually do any physical work in the area, they just use the data to determine if they think it's prospective, and then can carry on from that to other types of licenses. The next type of license is slightly darker green, and that's an exploration right. And then the very darkest green are production rights. On the west coast, you can see one around there, in this area over here, if you can see my cursor. And then all the others are down here in this block over here that is operated by Petra SA. And that includes gas to Mossel Bay and previous small oil fields that had production of oil. So at the moment, there are 6 production rights offshore. And as I said, 5 of them are in this area, and only one is independent of Petra SA. 20 exploration rights, a whole lot of different companies holding exploration rights in these green areas. And then there's 1 TCP under conversion and several applications and conversions in process, and those are the yellow areas. On this map, you can also see the logos of the companies that are involved, and you can see 1 or 2 household names for us, obviously, Petra SA, the state oil company, which does exploration, well known to all South Africans. Then, of course, Total, household name. Some of people might recognize ENI, which is the Italian national oil company, or has roots in the Italian national oil company, now private. And some sort of mid-sized international companies like Cosmos and Anadarko, also fairly well known. Our own Sasol, and then others that people would probably not have heard of that are quite small, and they are generally in partnerships with bigger companies. So if you're interested in this, this map is updated whenever there are changes, and you can download it from our website, which is shown there at the moment. So if we go to the West Coast in detail, you can see there are a lot of different companies exploring, and I'm not going to look at those in detail. But just to say, in shallow water, there's AEC, Crown, Petra SA, a little company called Rhino Oil. There's a production right trying to get off the ground here, which is operated by Sunbird, which has become a South African company with roots originally in Australia. Then in the mid-basin, there's a whole group of companies like Sungu Sungu and Rikakure and Syzygen. Those are all South African companies. In the deep water, we get companies like Cosmos, which is a very, very experienced explorer, and of course Shell. And in the southern basin down here, we have Anadarko, Shell, and Petra SA in a partnership together. But what I want to concentrate on, and that's because something is about to happen, is this area over here, held by Africa Energy Corporation at the moment. So here's a little cutout of that map, and there's the area over there, and it's blown up over here. You can see it here. So this is where 1988, there was an oil discovery made at the AJ well, which is over there. And that was quite a waxy oil, and at the time it was regarded as being non-commercial for any kind of production. So now, 32 years later, finally, Africa Energy Corporation has brought along partners in Azinam and Panoro Energy, and they are going to move forward with exploring this area for more oil. And what has actually prompted them to do this is that the technical team from Africa Energy Corporation has had a lot of experience in the Rift Basin up in Uganda. And this is very, very similar in geological setting, actually. So they feel very comfortable in this kind of geological setting and feel that they can identify prospectivity and have the ability to identify good prospectivity. So this partnership at the moment is awaiting ministerial approval, but they hope to start drilling in the first quarter of next year. It's in very shallow water for us, 150 meters, and it's going to be up dip, in other words, closer to the coast from the AJ1 oil discovery, and they estimate that they will spend about $21 million on their first well. So this well is going to be called Gazania. This is a cross-section through that area. This is on the right-hand side. You can see the AJ1 oil discovery drilled by Suko in those days in 1988, discovered oil down here at about 3,300 meters below surface. And that oil was brought to surface, but didn't flow very well and was quite waxy. So this is their model. This is what was, so this is what was discovered on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side is their model of what they're hoping to discover at the Gazania well. And there are two reservoir levels, the upper one, which they're calling the Namaqualand, which they imagine they will intersect at about nearly 2 kilometers below surface, and then a little further on, a few hundred meters deeper, into the main reservoir of Gazania. So the map at the bottom here, on the bottom right-hand side, shows that besides these, Gazania and that, they have identified even more prospectivity in the area. So this is looking really, really exciting for the West Coast, and hopefully one of these days we will have oil production from this area. And if we move to the South Coast, once again, a number of explorers. PetroSA, of course, running this block, which is known as Block 9, where they've had oil production from small oil fields in the central part of the block, and of course gas production and condensate production from the northern rim of the block going to the Mossel Bay GTL plant since the late 90s. And that is still going, but getting very, very close to depletion. Then there are other explorers like New Age and Rift, very small companies from, these are UK-based, also Impact UK-based. Unfortunately here in this area, Equinor, which is Norwegian and comes from Statoil originally, they have just announced that they're leaving this block, but it does leave Total and OK Energy, a small UK company operating in this area. But importantly, in this area, in the very deep water, is this block over here, which is operated by Total, together with newish partners, Qatar Petroleum, Canadian Natural Resources, who are the original holder of the block, and then a small company called Main Street, which is actually a subsidiary of African Energy Corporation, but is their BEE partner. And I want to concentrate on what is happening in this block. You can see it's a deep water block. Here are the isobaths. There's 200 meters, and it goes all the way to just shy of 2,000 meters. And this, in fact, is the block of where the Brulpadda discovery was made. So in 2014, Canadian Natural Resources and Total were in partnership in the block on their own, and they made an attempt to drill the Brulpadda well. It is in a geological feature called Padafasi, and that is because of the shape of this feature in map form. It looks like a tadpole. And then all the prospects ended up getting names of frogs. So Bulpada was the first one. And they attempted to drill it in July of 2014 and had immense difficulty with the conditions out there. So the well was drilled to only 500 meters below the sea floor, got down to 1835 meters, and then unfortunately had to be suspended in September, having spent over $200 million and getting nowhere near the actual prospect target. They used a semi-submersible drill rig called the Eric Rauder. You can see that over here. But what stopped them from drilling was the extreme mid-ocean conditions. I'm sure everybody is aware that the Agulhas current, warm currents coming down from Mozambique, barrels down here, retroflects on itself, swirls around here, does all sorts of terrible things, and can even reach, has been known or measured to reach speed of just short of 5 knots, which is about 8.5 to 9 kilometers an hour. It's quite extreme. When one of the helicopter pilots that took a crew change out to this rig was on his way to the rig or just about to land, he actually asked the captain of the rig if he could stop the rig moving, because he thought it was moving. In fact, the rig was stationary, but there was such an extreme stream around it that it looked as if it was underway. So they had to stop. That was in September 2014. Then 4 years later, they managed to find themselves further partners to share the risk, being Qatar Petroleum. It took on a 25% partnership. And so they were a new entry, and then also Main Street, which is, as said, a CSBE partnership from South Africa. So they used Odfeld's Deep Sea Stavanger, which comes from Norway. And here you can see it leaving Cape Town on the way to the well site. It is just on 10 years old now and was built in Korea and has quite an extreme water depth capacity. So this time for them, luckily, everything that could go right went right. It was quite amazing. The rig arrived in mid-December in 2018 and began drilling about 2 weeks later, 10 days later, on Christmas Eve in 2018. And by the end of February, they drilled down to target and announced a successful discovery. So here you can see, this is obviously not to scale, but this was drilled in about 1,000 or just over 1,400 meters of water. And at the top of this slide, now you can see what they were expecting. So there you can see the rig and 1,400 meters of water before you start drilling to the sea floor. They expected the first target to come in at about 3,170 meters and the second target to be nearly 3,600 meters below Kelly bushing on the rig. And then below here, you can see what actually happened. There is no well nearby to calibrate the geophysical data that was available. So as you can see, their depth estimates were pretty much, were quite wrong. So the first target came in a lot shallower, and as did the second target, a good few hundred meters. But they did discover in the top target light oil and gas condensate, and in the second target gas condensate. And they announced that what they thought, they weren't able to test the well because of the weather conditions or the mid-ocean conditions. They wanted to just drill to prove that it was possible and get out of the area as fast as possible. So there was no time spent testing flow rates. But from their estimations or modeling of these reservoirs, they did announce that they discovered about 1 billion barrel of oil equivalent. So in other words, in terms of the energy that 1 billion barrels of oil would give, that is what the amount of condensate here is calculated to be. And that is a world-class discovery, and it has opened up deepwater exploration in South Africa. It is a major step forward for us. So that was just on, well, nearly a year and 8 months ago now. So what next? This is the area that Total has under license together with its partners. And there's in yellow, you can see this geological feature, depositional feature, that was actually deposited from the west when the tail of South America and the Falkland Islands were still more or less in this position, so that you were getting deposition of sediment moving from those continental sections down into the opening ocean at the time over here. And in orange, you can see the 5 prospects that they had identified, and that one there is the Brill Putter. So just after they drilled Brill Putter, they then got some more seismic vessels into the area and acquired nearly 3,000 square kilometers of new 3D using 2 vessels from PGS and another one from Polarcus over this whole area where these 5 prospects were. And this helped them to better delineate what was going on in the prospects, and also to better understand the geology of the area and decide what to do next. So this is a map of all the different prospectivity that they've identified from that new seismic. So first of all, down here, you can see the Brill Putter well site, and in orange, the map view of the area where there is oil and gas condensate as discovered by the Brill Putter well. And then there are 4 blue areas that are the remainder of the original 5 prospects. The biggest one being Leipert. As I said, they're all named after, for frogs. So you've got Platanna, Brill Putter, which came in successfully, Voetboom still to be drilled. There should be actually be Leipert Putter, and then Blaasoppie, also Putter. But besides that, they identified many other possible leads and prospectivity in the area. So that's really, really exciting. And having acquired this new seismic data, they were in a far better position to understand what was going on. So they interpreted that as extremely positive. And this is their cross-sectional model of what they feel is going on. So here you can see under Brill Putter, it's called 1AX because that's a re-entry into an original well with a water depth of 1,432 meters. And then the first reservoir was a little bit of oil, but mostly gas condensate coming in at 3,170 meters. And then deeper down, 3,570 meters, the second gas condensate reservoir. And there's the undrilled Platanna waiting, Voetboom waiting to be drilled. The next prospect to be drilled coming up here, Leipert, with Leipert Deep as well. Like Brill Putter, it has double prospects. And then right to the eastern side is Blaasopp and Blaasopp Deep. So, as I said, this new seismic data really encouraged them in what they could see. And because of that, they decided they were going to drill Leipert Putter, or they're calling it Leipert now. And because of that, they got hold of Oddfell again and contracted the Deep Sea Stavanger, which was a successful rig in the first well. And that left Norway around about the 2nd of July, together with 2 anchor handling tugs. And here you can see a picture of it being towed through the Straits of Dover just after that, on the 4th of July. And it was expected to arrive in Cape Town on the 12th of August, and in fact did so. So just before we get there, I just want to explain that this is a semi-submersible rig. So in shallow water, the usual thing is to get a rig that can actually stand with jack-up legs, so it floats. And when it's moving, these legs actually stick out the top of the rig, and this thing floats on a barge-like surface. When it gets to position, the legs are lowered down onto the sea floor, and the whole thing is held in place with anchors and so on. If the water is shallow enough, then this setup works, and you can drill. If the water is extremely deep and the meta-ocean conditions are okay, you can use what is called a drill ship, which is dynamically positioned, so it's not anchored in place, it's just using thrusters to keep it dynamically positioned. And that's often used to drill in extremely deep water. But this particular rig is a semi-submersible, and it is also, in fact, dynamically positioned. It is anchored, obviously, so that if everything fails, it doesn't float away. But the main thing keeping it in place is its own thrusters set in the legs of the rig, constantly keeping it in position and constantly fighting against this very, very strong current. And in fact, Brulpadda set a world first in that not only did it have the rig's own dynamic positioning system keeping it in place, but it was also permanently attached to a tug that was feeding information to the rig's own navigational computer and pulling against the current constantly. So that is the first time something like that has been done in a drilling situation. The reason they went with a semi-submersible rather than a drill ship is because of the extreme conditions. They felt that a semi-submersible would handle not only the current, but also the swell out in that area better than a drill ship. So they have brought the drill back, and it arrived in Cape Town mid-August. It spent a few days in harbour. I'm sure a lot of people have seen it offshore. It was off an island for a while. But now it is out at the drill site, which is over here. So it's just off, once again, off Mossel Bay. And in fact, the well started 2 days ago. It was spudded or began drilling 2 days ago. It is being weighted on by 2 anchor handling tugs, these 2 vessels, the Prosper and the Drot, and it also has these 2 vessels servicing it, going to and from George, Mossel Bay and Cape Town, and also a couple of helicopters that are looking after it. It could be there for up to 140 days, depending on how successful the drilling is and whether they decide to test or not. And then Total and their partners also have an option to keep the rig here and perhaps drill a further well if they're sufficiently encouraged by what they find at Laypit, or more correctly, Laypit Padda. So besides that, at the time when they were collecting new seismic data over the Padafisi structure and delineating these prospects and trying to get a better understanding of them, they also collected over 7,000 kilometers of new 2D data to the east, also in deep water. And using that data, we're able to delineate a second structure, a large depositional structure of the same sort of geological origin, which they've called Kloof Padda, and that has yet to be examined in some detail for prospectivity. But this is a very, very exciting development for us. If all of these come in and there's prospectivity here, this is going to be a very large condensate, gas, and maybe even oil province for South Africa. It's a very, very exciting development indeed. So we wish them and their partners the best of luck with exploration in this area. Then moving on to our east coast, unfortunately things have lagged a little here. There is a large area under license to our own Sasol and together with the Italians E&I. And they have in fact identified 2 areas that they would like to drill in really deep water, but because of COVID and so on, things have been held up. But there are also other licenses closer to the coast held by Impact Africa, originally with ExxonMobil, who has decided to leave the area, and there are a couple in conversion in deep water. So this just shows the area held by Sasol and E&I together. They were planning to actually drill in fact, last year, even into this year, and COVID put a spoke in that wheel, but they have identified an area of prospectivity up in the north of their area and also in the south. And we're talking about drilling 1 or 2 wells, and depending on the success of those, even up to 5 wells. So hopefully that will get off the ground within the next year or 2, when the whole COVID debacle is something of the past. And besides that, there's also new data that is going to be collected offshore, hopefully quite shortly. This is by companies that specialize in collecting seismic data, taking a license with us, with the South African government, and being allowed to sell that, although the data belongs to South Africa, but getting a license to be able the sole seller of it for 10 years or so to the industry, and that helps us to attract new investment. So there's a large possible seismic survey planned for the south coast by a group called Spectrum, and then also another one off our west coast by PGS. So we also hope that that should happen in the next year or so. So that was really shortly things that are happening and are about to happen on the offshore. So what I'm going to do now is move to the onshore. And the onshore is a very, very different environment. Much older geology and very different in terms of oil and gas. And the main difference is that offshore, all exploration is for what's known as conventional oil and gas, where the oil and gas is reservoired in a different rock from the one in which it was generated. But onshore, all exploration, or almost entirely all exploration, is for what's known as unconventional oil and gas, and three different types, and mostly gas, in fact. First of all, biogenic gas, which is gas generated by bacteria breaking down organic material in the rock and can almost be seen as a renewable resource. Then coal bed methane, which is gas associated with coal, obviously, as the name implies. And then finally, shale gas. So onshore, the color scheme for the licensing system is exactly the same as offshore. You can see there are yellows and greens, the lighter greens being technical cooperation permits, the mid greens being exploration rights, and the darkest green, and surprisingly, perhaps for some, is that there's actually a production right onshore. And then you can see also the logos of the companies involved. Once again, a very well-known household name being Shell. And then some smaller, well, companies that we also know, Anglo American, for example, and then a whole lot of smaller ones that most people have never heard of. The difference being that onshore exploration is less risky in terms of capital, and smaller companies and more local companies are willing to take that risk. So currently we have 1 production right onshore, 23 exploration rights, and 2 technical cooperation rights. I'm not going to say much about anything about coal bed methane, other than exploration for coal bed methane is concentrated in the north and the east of the country, obviously where there are coal deposits. There have been some fairly significant discoveries, but all of those are struggling to monetize those discoveries, whether it be through planned electricity production or co-firing with existing coal stations or something completely different. What I am going to look at is biogenic gas, which is very interesting. So when boreholes were drilled in the Evander and Virginia gold fields, just to core them to look for gold deposits, many of them started to flow gas to surface for many, many, many years. So a company called Tetra 4, which belongs to Renogen, which actually specializes in renewable energy, has taken out a production right for gas, natural gas, in the Evander Goldfield area. And currently they are producing methane, but only from 1 well, and using it to produce compressed natural gas. And they're using it to power a bunch of buses in the area that are used for carrying mine workers to and from work. But they certainly have plans to expand, and those are well on their way. So, excuse me, their plan is to bring a further 11 wells online, and the new gas pipeline and construction a new helium and LNG plant is imminent. They already have their balance of plant construction contract in place with EPCM Bonisa, and they will become the first commercial suppliers of LNG gas in South Africa. They will cease CNG production and move over to LNG, and they hope to get their first gas to their plant. Their pipeline design is completed already earlier this year. They hope to have their first gas to their plant by July 2021. It's a very, very interesting project, and if you are interested in it, just look up. You can see here's their website address. It's renogen.co.za. There's a great deal of information on their website about their plans and what they hope to do. I must say, this little company, it's very, very small in terms of gas production and international gas fields and so on, but they are really, really energetic and moving ahead and have the honor of being South Africa's first indigenous onshore gas producers. Then we get to the question of shale gas. And this is a very, very big question, of course. So at the moment, there is in fact no license granted for shale gas exploration. And we know not very much about shale gas. Shale gas in South Africa is expected to be in the mid to southern Karoo, in this area over here. And the first inkling that we got that South Africa might have potential for shale gas came from the EIA, American organization, who looked at countries around the world and their shale gas potential. They came up with the idea that South Africa had the potential, this was in 2015, of about 370 TCF of gas. This is an enormous amount of gas. It's 370 times the amount of gas that got the Mossel Bay gas plant off the ground. So when we heard that, we thought we were taken a bit by surprise, to be honest, and Petroleum Agency SA's technical group started looking into shale gas, and after quite a few years of work came up with a best estimate of only 36 TCF, which is an order of magnitude throughout the Karoo called the White Hill. Consequently, we have taken all the information, all new information that we've managed to gather to make the prospective area 3 times bigger than we originally thought, through absolutely no other way. As I said, there are no licenses at the moment for shale gas, but there are 5 applications. 3 of them are by Shell. There are these 3 areas here up in the northern part of this section. One is by Bundu, which is a South African company, and another one is a Canadian company called Falcon. So all of these are waiting for legislation and regulation to come into place. So if we look at this slide, you can see, obviously everybody knows shale gas production is extremely controversial. There are issues with water, and for hydraulic fracturing, of course, you do need water. It's mixed with chemicals, it's brought into the area, and in the Karoo, this would have obviously be the case because there is insufficient water of sufficient quality, so water would have to be brought into the area with a lot of trucks, for example, injected into the well. So this is the vertical section of the well going through potable water aquifer, for example. It's cased all the way down to here. When it gets closer to the shale gas bearing formation, it becomes horizontal and is drilled horizontally to expose as much of the well bore to shale as possible. And then water and some type of chemical is forced down the well under pressure, which then opens the natural fracture system in the rock. And it is also accompanied with something called a proppant, which can be sand or even little ceramic beads. And these remain in these fractures and hold them open, and the water and chemical mix is taken back to surface, stored in hopefully a watertight container to keep it out of the environment, and then finally removed and dealt with. So that is the whole system of fracking. As you know, it's very controversial. People are very worried about water use, water pollution, changes in pressure causing seismicity and earthquakes, etc., etc. So that was the model, and this is what it looks like in reality, a very, very different picture. So picture this as the pristine Karoo, and along comes an explorer and cleans up this pad, removing all the vegetation, flattening it, building these ponds to contain water and chemical mixes, lots of accommodation units, trucks coming and going, and then the drill rig itself, obviously. So there are a lot of issues, and for that reason, we as yet have not granted any license for shale gas exploration because of the possibilities of environmental issues. So what is happening at the moment, a number of projects to look at the conditions of the Karoo as they are before shale gas exploration begins or might begin. And the first of these, which isn't on the slide, is the drilling of a well through the Council of Geoscience together with the Petroleum Agency at Beaufort West, which is more or less in the center of what we consider to be the best area for shale gas, and to drill it down to the shale gas level, to sample the shale, to see if there is actually gas in the shale, and also to look at the condition of the groundwater in this well. There won't be any hydraulic fracturing or anything like that. It's just to retrieve samples of the shale, look at its ability to frack, for example, which will be done in a laboratory, and also to look at its gas content and look at the condition of the underground water. So besides that, we've also got a project on the go, which has already started in the Karoo, looking at what gas is already flowing to surface naturally. So we put little probes in the ground. These are left there for some weeks. They collect gas and they're taken off to a laboratory and analyzed. And we can see if there are hydrocarbon gases actually escaping to surface and if they are thermally generated, which would give us some kind of indication that there is in fact gas generation and gas movement going on underground. And this will also give us a baseline to see what gas is naturally in the soil versus any gas that might come about through, hopefully not, but through shale gas exploration activity. So we can compare baseline of before and after any kind of activity, and then control and ameliorate any issues. Another thing is looking at groundwater, which is dear to everybody's hearts in the area and probably one of the most important issues. People really feel that shale gas exploration is going to pollute groundwater, which is very precious to farmers and all the people living in the area, obviously. So we are currently undertaking a project to look at all the existing groundwater, where it's occurring, how deep it is, what sort of condition it is, its flow rates and yields, what it's used for, agriculture, whether it's used for people, agriculture, etc. And we're going to set up a framework with the Department of Environment to use as a baseline, again, to see if any shale gas exploration activity does ever affect water and groundwater, and then of course we can take action and react accordingly. Another one you may not know, but the very first oil and gas exploration in South Africa in fact took place onshore in the 60s and 70s, well actually in the 40s, but mostly in the 60s and 70s. And there are a number of wells that were drilled in the area that have just been abandoned and left to their own devices, because in those days, environmental issues were not taken so seriously, and there weren't strong regulations about how these things should be completed and sealed off to protect groundwater. So we are tracking all of these down and looking at the condition that they're in and setting up plans to, if they are leaking gas into the environment, to try and sort that out and clean them up. So that's another project we're busy with. And then another one, I'm sure most people are aware that shale gas has been accused or is known to cause earthquakes to some extent, or seismicity. And that is because injection of fluids and hydraulic fracturing fluids into the ground at high pressure, of course, changes the pressure regime underground. And that causes rock to move around, resulting in seismicity. So we have looked at the existing network of seismography in the Karoo, and found that it is actually inadequate to be able to do what we want to do, to set up a background study. So we're adding a few more seismographs, and those will be across the area where shale gas exploration might occur. Yeah, so that is also ongoing. And so then that brings me to the reason why shale gas exploration licenses haven't been granted, and that is because of the status of the legislation. So you might know the MPRDA is the current legislation that controls oil and gas exploration, but it is strongly together with hard minerals. It's all together in the same set of legislation. So not too long ago, President Ramaphosa and also Minister Mantashe announced plans to take oil and gas exploration and legislation out of this set of legislation and formulate its own standalone.
So let's get there first to our chat box. I have no idea how this works. Apologies.
I see already one question from Stefan. Yeah.
Go for it then. I'm still trying to get
Yeah,
my
it
chat up and
says, I
running.
can just read it because it says it's to me privately. It says, I believe Anadarko was sold to Total, and do Anadarko still hold the right? So what you're talking about there is the license area in the southern west coast. And in fact, that is correct. Anadarko were bought out by Total, but Total decided to keep it under the name of Anadarko, registered in South Africa for some reason known probably only to company lawyers. But yes, that is correct. So in fact, Total has got more involvement than is obvious at first sight.
All right, I actually can't get into my chat. So is there anybody that has a question? I think there is. Yeah, I see a record sign going on. Any questions? Dave, do you see anything on your side? I'm sorry, I'm using a different
Yeah, so
tablet
no,
here.
that was the only question I can see in the chat at the moment.
I just posted hi. Okay, there we go. There's a question.
Here's a question. There's another question here. Yeah, is Mossel Bay Refinery going to become a white elephant? That is a burning question. So PetroSA have actually announced publicly that they will run out of gas in the next year or so. Now, whether it becomes a white elephant or not is very difficult to predict, because it is a possible method of monetizing the gas condensate that has just been discovered by Total a little bit further offshore. But development plans that come out of that depend entirely on the operator or the operator partnership. They are not decided or even imposed by South Africa in any way. So it's entirely up to the operators on how they choose to develop, and if they choose to develop what they discover. So I would like to say, hopefully not, it won't. And there's even the possibility that there is still enough gas to produce. It may not be enough gas to run a full train of the refinery, but there is enough gas to produce. And it's possible that the refinery to some extent might even turn into some form of power plant, which could run for a few years on the remaining gas. But those things are really up to PetroSA, and then should other gas be brought in, that would be indigenous gas, that is, that would be up to the operators in charge of those areas. Yeah.
Any
I
other,
don't
there's
see any
another
more.
question.
Oh, yeah, here's another one. Yeah. Now, given a promising future, how do mechanical engineers align their skills? Yeah, so that is also something that, and I see there are SOGA members in the group. I think they are the ones who really drive that sort of thing, trying to develop skills, South African skills for the oil and gas industry. And unfortunately, it's always been a chicken and egg kind of situation. It's all very well developing skills which are very specialized for the oil and gas industry up front. And then you sit with these qualified and capable people and no oil and gas industry. So this has always been the problem. So waiting, on the other hand, waiting for the oil and gas industry to come along, and while it's actually, things are actually happening, because there's no local skill, then of course it's imported. So that's been something that has to be juggled and is very, very difficult. Norway was very good at doing that and moved from a country where everything was done by outsiders to where everything is done locally. And hopefully that will happen here. If we really get things off the ground with this deep water southern offshore and maybe also our west coast, and eventually some onshore work, then I think universities and colleges and so on will definitely have to move quickly and change their approach to developing the kind of engineering skills that are required by the oil and gas industry. Next question I see here is, what is the time frame for the earliest production? That's very difficult to answer. If you're talking about the South Coast discoveries, as I tried to explain, it's in an area where the met ocean conditions are extreme. There's this very, very strong current, and it's very deep water. It's 1.5 k's depth of water, and the current is one of the strongest in the world. And not only that, it's completely unpredictable. And not only in speed or velocity, but also in direction. It turns back on itself. Does all sorts of strange things. So looking at the economic and even engineering viability of being able to produce these discoveries is probably going to take a good many years. First of all, I think the partners will want to prove to themselves that there's sufficient petroleum in place there, and producible petroleum, to actually justify the enormous amount of money that development is going to cost. So that is a very difficult question to answer. I think the world record for discovery to production was offshore Ghana, in offshore that is, and that was 3 years. But you can look at, I'm sure, a longer time frame for our discoveries. Can we have a copy of these slides? Yes, I will certainly send them to Peter. And what does this mean for our cost of fuel at filling stations? So that's a question often asked. Unfortunately, because of the system that South Africa uses, which is one adopted by most Western world countries, our operators are free to sell their product on the world open market. So it would probably not have any effect whatsoever on the cost of fuel at filling stations. What it would affect to some extent is the amount of foreign currency that South Africa has to fork out for imports of oil and or condensate, because in this case we wouldn't have to do that. It would be local. That's really the only. Besides that, of course, we do have a system of taxation and royalties in place. So it's not as if South Africa is not going to benefit in any way whatsoever. It's a pretty large system, and with the new legislation, the state cut actually will become more in line with international levels. So we're no longer such a high risk country for oil and gas exploration. We've proven that we've got a world-class petroleum field already. So it has made us more attractive, and we can therefore push up our bargaining power. Has Total given any indication of the composition of the condensate of gas from Bro Pada? No, because as I said, it was not brought to surface in terms of producing the well. It is interpreted as condensate from electric log interpretation and also from cores brought to surface. And those are we're still waiting on the results of that analysis.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Right. No, it doesn't seem so, Dave. Dave, thank you very much for taking the time to host us tonight and to give us a update on what's happening in our country. I think it was for myself, it was very insightful and interesting, and I'm sure we might have some follow-up questions. If we don't have questions now, we might have some follow-up questions where we can maybe contact you but yeah, no, thank you very much for taking the time tonight. I think with load shedding and everything, we luckily got through this presentation without too much of a hiccup.
It was an absolute pleasure, and thank you once again for the opportunity. And if people do have questions afterwards, you're absolutely welcome to contact me. I think Peter's got my email. I can share it with everybody, and I'll also share the slides with him in the next day or two.
Thank you very much, Dave. And then just for the members, I have just posted the CPD validation code on the comment section, so you can find it there. All right, thank you very much for all that has attended. It was a very well attended technical talk, and we'll hope to see you next time. Thank you very much. Good night.
Absolutely welcome, and thank you, everybody. I hope you did find it interesting. Bye-bye.